Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Ask the Expert series. We're very happy that you could join us. My name's Aaron, and I am studying international relations in my final year. Now, during this session, we'll be talking about the current US presidential election, populism, and Trumpism. To help us do that, we'll be joined by Associate Professor Jonathan Rose, Lecturer in Political Theory Simon Stevens, and of course, a current student from the Faculty of Business and Law here at DMU, Gavin. We'll be answering your questions you have at the end of the live stream, so please do leave us a comment if you'd like to join the discussion, or if you simply have any questions about the topic that we'll be discussing today, which is, of course, US politics. First of all, let's introduce everybody joining me today. Over to Jonathan.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Rose. As it says right there, I'm an associate professor in the Department of Politics, and I specialise in issues of corruption, integrity, a little bit of research methods. They're always exciting. Sort of a renaissance man in this regard.
Thanks, Jonathan. Now over to Simon.
Evening, my name is Simon, as already explained. I'm a political theorist, so I guess what that means is I think a lot about power, and a lot of my work has actually taken me into homelessness, which has also taken me into questions of how we construct ideas of them and us, right? Insider, outsider. So that's kind of called othering in sociology. So it intersects with sociology a lot, and I kind of do some work on intersectionality in identity politics. And I steal Jonathan's notes because he has the best ideas. So,
thanks, Simon. And now finally over to Gavin.
Hey everyone, my name's Gavin. I'm a student here at De Montfort University. I'm currently studying international relations and politics, as it says down below, and I study with Aaron, which is great fun.
That was great, and thank you all for joining me. Now, Jonathan, let's start with you, if you don't mind, please. Could you please talk to us about the topic of the day, which is, of course, the current US presidential election, with particularly your regards to your experience, your expertise relating to it?
So the thing I'm most interested about what's going on at the minute with American politics is how unconcerned a significant number of voters in America seem to be about the potential, the real, the imagined, or the potential for issues of corruption, challenges to integrity, a denial of transparency. And I just find it really interesting how that intersects with like this notion of fake news and the creation of like partisan facts. So on the one hand, you have what is fair to say extremely credible allegations that Donald Trump has been hiding very large amounts of money, including in China, where so large that he ended up paying more tax in China than he did to the United States. And the response to that is either, in this case, it seems to be ignore. Outside of that, it seems to be to simply deny, but to deny in a way which is really interesting, to just say that's fake news. And the simple word formula fake news means then there's no need to address it any longer. It has been dealt with. And I'm so interested in the way that people have just come to accept that narrative. It's like that's okay then. Okay, that was fake news. And I now know what to believe. I've seized on that word formula. And I'm okay with that. And I find it so strange. There's traditionally been this idea like that Americans in particular really value straight shooting. If you go to Joe Biden's Dream Island on Animal Crossing, so if you've got Animal Crossing, you can visit Joe Biden's island. And when you speak to Joe, he says, no malarkey, because like he's a straight shooter. He knows what he's on about. And there's always this idea that people really valued that. Read my lips, like I speak the truth. And that has so much got lost so quickly. I just find it's wonderfully interesting to see happen in real time and devastating, of course, for the entire world, but also interesting.
Yeah. So I guess the thing that I'm kind of most interested in, which intersects with what you're saying, is how I mean, this isn't unique to American politics at the moment, right? Or Trumpism, but we've just got this kind of reign of confusion, right? So this, the fact that there are this sort of false equivalence with competing facts, and it kind of works on both sides. And I often find this really interesting because first of all, we've got to think about, well, like who and what benefits from an environment of confusion, right? Which is created by this idea of, fake news and things like that. And the confusion that comes from, the very person that is guilty of committing fake news, if we want to use the term, right? That's his sort of strongest accusation against his opponents, right? So, and this is a classic kind of, I don't know, I'm just going to say it. I'm going to say the F word, right? It's a classic fascistic tactic to do that, right? Because you've only got two things that are going to happen. Either people are going to believe you, in which case, great, you've achieved that, or they're not going to know what to believe or think. And therefore, they also benefit, that type of politics benefits from confusion and people not knowing what to think, and then inevitably giving up on the idea that there is any such truth, which I find very interesting in terms of what I teach and learn political philosophy, because obviously that idea that truth is not singular, not objective, it's relative, is something that has existed in philosophy for a very long time. So I wonder, is there some kind of complicity from those ideas kind of now being originally kind of created and disseminated into societies? Is there a link there at all? And so here's a thought, I guess. And I don't know, I wonder what sort of Gavin would think about this, right? Conspiracy theories, and that you see them on all sides of the political spectrum. And I find it increasingly interesting that, let's say, for example, the whole sort of anti-big pharma stuff, right, that goes on, and the anti-COVID stuff, which Trump is kind of using to his advantage. It's interesting how there's so much scrutiny on that. And we know that big pharma gets corrupted by a profit motive. Perhaps we could talk a bit more about that. But what I often don't see as well, from the other side, if you like, is this idea that the homeopathic industry is also not something that can be corrupted by profit motive, as if that somehow makes it pure. And I guess that leads into this idea of division that Jonathan's talking about. We end up in culture wars and stuff like that. So confusion, I guess, is the key word. And I don't know, is that how you see the political environment at the moment in America, Gavin? Is that kind of how you think about it?
Yeah, I do actually. So I study the American presidency module here at DMU, and we're always just talking about like the culture war between Republicans and Democrats. It's just two kind of societies, two different really Americas living side by side. There isn't actually, I don't think you could now clearly say that there is one America. There's not one kind of definition of an American, because Republican Americans and Democrat Americans are just so further apart than what it's like over in this country. And again, this is what Jonathan Rose was saying, is that creates division where nothing can get done, especially in the US. And going on to your point about big pharma, like the Democrats see that as a tyranny, but then Republicans will see it as some way to make money and for people to create the American dream. I don't know what Aaron thinks about it. I'm sure he probably agrees with me, but I'll pass it over to Aaron.
Yeah, Gavin, you've hit the nail straight on the head, particularly when you talk about, two kind of polar opposites. And I think it's really important to recognize that Trump has obviously had a massive part to play in that. And he's really drove a wedge, not only between, Americans and the media, but Americans and each other as well. I mean, there's a very much like us against them rhetoric at the moment, especially that was true in 2016. But it's even more true now. The whole, I'm here to like save your jobs. I'm here to protect you from China. I'm here to protect you from the Democrats. So yeah, I think it's really important that we recognize, and that it is recognized, that Trump has obviously had a massive part to play in that polarization. And it might even be fair for me to say that is his intention, to drive a wedge between, Americans and each other.
Yeah. Also, I would say that that Donald Trump is also a symptom of the deep polarization that's happened in America, where probably from the times of even Reagan, Watergate, kind of around about the 80s and the 70s, that's kind of when Americans were starting to kind of drift apart into kind of two camps, especially when President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, and how much that divided white Southerners and Northerners from the times of Abraham Lincoln. And ever since kind of there, that's kind of been kind of the pulling point. I've been dragging those two kind of camps away from each other, and I'm guessing that Donald Trump is that symptom.
Thank you, Gavin. I'm just going to bring in Jonathan here. Jonathan, what kind of impact do you think social media and the like has had, on this polarization and stuff like this? It's obviously helped Trump, correct?
I think social media is a terrible thing that has happened to the world, and it took us a little while to figure that out. But
I think there was a reason we shared an office.
It's pretty much the worst thing that's happened in the entire world in like the last 20 years. And I never saw it coming, right? When you're younger and you've got a GeoCities webpage, as we all did, like people who are our age, we all did. That was a thing. And you never imagined that you were taking part in the first steps of the downfall of democracy. But it was coming. We should have known. We should have seen it when we were when first joining Facebook. And I'm still proud that I held out until 2005 before joining Facebook. And then everyone else was on it. So, oh well, more or less left now at the standards. So, yes, there's a polarization. And Gavin's right that in terms of how that is conceptualized, that polarization as a political party issue, where the parties are like you're with us or you're against us, and being a member of my party is more or less the same thing as being a good person. One of my mates has done some research where they gave examples of people committing, I suppose, unethical behavior of one kind or another, like a bloke's cheating on his wife, or he's cheating on his taxes, or he's stealing. And they changed them for different people only ever so slightly. They either put in oh, and he's a Republican, or oh, and he's a Democrat. And particularly for Republican readers, you get a really strong swing. Oh, but he's a Republican first and an adulterer and a thief second. And so that really matters. So yes, that polarization has existed, has got worse. And I think social media has definitely played into that, because you've got cultures now where you can have your own subculture. And in that, you can curate your own idea of news. And if you spend any time on Reddit, if you ever make the mistake of going to the conservative subreddit, you get banned immediately for simply suggesting well, perhaps here's a credible source that suggests that is incorrect. Can we have a talk about that? No, immediately gone. So I think there is real problems with that. At the same time, America is a country of polarization. They start off with the lofty ideals of George Washington, saying, oh, let's not have parties. We're all Americans here. And really, really soon after, you have, Alexander Hamilton was basically was he the chief secretary to the Treasury who got killed by, was he the Attorney General, Barr? But they had literally a duel to the death where one shot the other and killed him. Yeah. And so this idea of polarization. Sorry?
Aaron Burr was a senator.
Okay.
Put it out there.
So
fact check, mate.
It doesn't make it any better. It doesn't make it any better.
No, it's still that. Say that happened now, unless the person who was killed was Ted Stevens, people would be they'd be upset about it. Maybe also Ted Cruz. What is it with people called Ted? Over the years, there's been. George Bush said that if Ted Cruz was killed on the floor of the Senate and the trial took place in the Senate, no one would convict. But at least that was within a party. They were accepting that there's terrible people in our own party. And so it's kind of interesting how it's become so polarized between parties.
I think there's a couple of
No, go on,
important
sorry.
things probably to say here. Because I mean, you said downfall of democracy. I mean, that might need some explaining to some people. Like, that's a big thing to say, right? But I guess in terms of the social media thing too, what worries me, and this is actually very well presented in a Netflix documentary called The Social Dilemma. You know, with the way it's not just that you can create the news, right? It's that the news is also tailored towards you based upon, you know, your data streams. And so information about what you search for gets looked for. And if I can make like a crude example, which they actually did in this documentary, if you, based upon what your previous searches or previous YouTube watches have been, and other information like your geographical location, right? If you're in Texas, for example, again, crude example, but if you type in something like climate change is, the suggestion you'll get is a hoax, right? Whereas I'm pretty sure that if you lived in sunny California, right, the suggestion will be something different, like is scientifically proven, right? So that's kind of like going to an information source like Wikipedia and not getting the same information. So everybody is in their little kind of space or bubble or whatever, and can't understand why the other group isn't also thinking like them, because they assume that they're getting the same information, right? But they're not. And this feeds into conspiracy theory. And one of the things I also think is very interesting, which has very little research done on it. I attended the conference last year, the European Consortium for Political Research. It was an excellent paper where someone was actually talking about, look, we need to actually do some genuine research into the psychological attractions of conspiracy theories, right? Not just the politics of it, but what is psychologically attractive about a conspiracy theory. So I'd like to open that up perhaps as well as a question for everybody here to think about, because it seems to me that there's a sort of like you're in on a big secret, right? So that kind of makes you feel like you belong to something, and like a sort of community. Maybe it gives you a sense of intellectual empowerment because you know something that others don't. Like I feel like there is a certain psychological attraction to conspiracy theories, which is
I definitely think an element of it is like a sense of belonging as well, and knowing that there are other people out there who believe the same thing as you, and almost like a sense of exclusivity, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
but then it's really interesting that, like, because I get that people need a sense of belonging, and so you see it all the time, right? That's why people support football clubs and things, right? No one's just going to a football club like, oh well, I'm sure both sides had fun, well, let's go home. People associate with it, and they get tattoos about a football club and things. And from the point of view of someone who doesn't support a football team, that seems weird. But they'll get like, oh, I've got a big. It's like, I don't know, my father-in-law's got like a big black cat of one kind or another. Sunderland. It might be a panther. I don't know. He seems proud of it. So on the one hand, yeah, you've always had things like that. People say like, oh, I'm attached to this, and that's part of my identity, and that's fine. But it's a bit weird that it came to pass that then people started to do that about simply things that they believe to be true. Like, oh, well, I believe the world is flat, and I'm going to make that a crucial part of my identity. There's a bizarre overlap between Trump supporters and flat earthers. I don't know why. One would have thought like you could maintain the view that the earth is flat while still wanting like good social policies, but apparently not. Who knew?
We've actually got a great question, and for those that's watching, don't forget to drop us a question if you do have any thoughts or would like to generally just contribute to the discussion. We've got a question from Dominic asking, Robert Evans, in his podcast series It Could Happen Here, says that there are many things that Americans would agree on if given any space to do so. The opioid epidemic, for example. And Dominic's interested in asking, why are neither side invested in or in fact keen to create that dialogue? Simon, do you want to start with this, please?
Sorry, you dropped out a bit then on my ears. Can you just repeat?
Oh, apologies. Dominic's asking that there are, why neither side, Republican, Democrat, invested in or keen to create dialogue, even on topics where, both sides might agree, for example, the opioid epidemic.
Yeah, so I mean, I think now, of course, there's going to be many things about this. We know that politics can be quite sort of tribal in a lot of senses. And like Jonathan has said, you've got the whole kind of football team analogy there. But I think it's become exacerbated at the moment because there's so much. I mean, how do you even begin to create dialogue with a president, right? And of course, there are other members of the Republican Party, but if he's sort of fronting it up, how do you even begin to create dialogue with a president whose very task or purpose, it seems to be, is to disrupt dialogue, right? I mean, we saw that with the debate, right? And how can dialogue be had in that environment, right? And I think it's made worse, perhaps we're all complicit in this, in the way that we behave as well on social media, for example, right? I do think, I just kind of want to make a point that, look, we are so quick to point the finger at these companies, and don't get me wrong, they have a model, right, which makes more money off of people having disagreements. But the moment that we thought we could get free services, free platforms, we would turn from the consumer into the product, right? So, the more we're on Facebook, the more money they make for advertising. So maybe it's just a general cultural problem that we have at the moment, that dialogue is just so hard to achieve because we're all complicit in this kind of, I don't know, reign of confusion or separation. But I mean, maybe I'm being too partisan here and blaming it on what, not necessarily just Trump, but what Trump represents.
But he also represents a sense that, so the idea of talking about the opioid epidemic, which Dominic is right in a sense that there probably would be a lot of agreement on it, but I don't think there'd be agreement from Trump because he has a seemingly pathological need for everything he does to be the best that's ever happened. And he talks about everything that's going on in that context. And so I honestly think if you said, well, surely you agree that the opioid epidemic is a problem and needs to be tackled, I would not be at all surprised if he either denied its existence or if he said that he has succeeded in tackling, and no one has ever been more successful than Donald J. Trump in tackling the opioid epidemic. Everyone said it couldn't be done, and then I did it.
Thank you, Jonathan. We actually have another question from Iron Throne. Gavin, I wonder if you could help answer how you think you could have a dialogue with Trump, for example, in the first presidential debate, because obviously there was that whole, Biden talking over Trump kind of thing. How do you think a dialogue with Trump is possible, given that, especially since we have the debate coming up? I think it's Thursday.
Oh, crikey, that's a question and a half. Iron Tyrone. I don't think he could have a dialogue with Trump in a debate kind of session, because in American politics and in a presidential debate, you're kind of making your pitch. You should really be making your pitch to the country rather than sitting down and discussing how you can get a piece of legislation through both houses of Congress smoothly and in the interest of Americans. So I would say that you'd have to kind of move away from the election and move away from presidential debates and actually sit down with the president and cabinet secretaries, undersecretaries, the leaders of both parties within Congress, and work out that compromise and get his mind and work out with yours. So I think also tying in that the previous question from Dominic is that a lot of Americans do agree, and I think there is a lot of stuff that privately that the president and the vice president as well agree with most Americans on. However, you might just need to kind of compromise. And in the words of one of my favorite prime ministers, is that compromise isn't and shouldn't be a dirty word in politics, as she said, leaving number 10. But I think there is a lot of things that can get done, but I think you have to move away from the election, because the election is far too divisive and it's not that kind of route you should take in order to get significant policies and legislation in the best interest of all Americans, hopefully.
Thank you, Gavin. Simon, do you have anything to add in terms of, how you think it could be possible to create a dialogue with Trump, either during or outside of an election cycle?
So I just kind of want to say as well, let's not give too much credit to Trump here, right? Let's not do this kind of great men of history idea that it's just all him and he's been the only cause of this, right? He's, there is a sort of interplay between him being a cause but also a symptom. And I think, I actually thought the Mike Pence Kamala Harris debate was more interesting to watch because, and it was a tactic. He was trying to disrupt her. And after the whole Biden thing, they'd obviously sat down and thought about this. And, if anyone hasn't seen this, put it into YouTube. There's 4 or 5 times where she just stops and just says to him really calmly, "I'm speaking." Which puts him in a whole world of trouble, right? Where in terms, what does he say to that, right? Because if he starts trying to talk over her, right, then he's going to have that whole kind of man talks over a woman kind of. That's not a good look, right? So I do think that this isn't just about Trump, but there's the very fact that they would have Trump, running for office in the first place shows you that there was perhaps a conscious decision here to embark on a politics of confusion, and in the way he speaks, the way he writes speeches, it only appeals, I think, to a certain group of people. He speaks in very great stutters, odd ways, kind of. So I don't know. I'm quite pessimistic about the concept of any dialogue, and if there is any dialogue and compromise about politics, it sure as that ain't going to happen on TV. It's going to be happening behind closed doors, where you know nothing about it.
Thank you, Simon. To bring him back, going back to the academic point of view, Jonathan, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about political adverts, post-truth, and the like. Obviously, with every election that seems to come along, more and more money is spent, and especially as we come up to the final 2 weeks now, really, there's so much money being poured into political advertising and that kind of thing. I wondered if you just could spend a few minutes and talk about that, please, Jonathan.
Yeah, it's something I'm super interested in. Although I see in the news, it's difficult to avoid getting distracted by the news, but it looks like Trump is kind of running out of money. So some states he's already pulled out of, states that he previously won. So let's wait and see on that. But political advertising is really interesting anyway, because it's a space which is like an advert, but not quite like an advert. So it's amazing the things that you're allowed to say in political advertising that you can't say in other kinds of adverts. Like if you're selling a washing machine and you say this spins at 700 RPM or whatever, I don't know. Maybe is that excessive for a washing machine? Who owns a washing machine? Who knows? Maybe they go that fast. I do. I'm not going down to check. Anyway, and so if you say that has to be true. And if it's not true, people can sue you. Like that's a relationship that you have with people. Like you say, my washing machine that I'm selling does this and it costs this much money. And you're held to that. And there's specific laws against it. You can't do things like bait and switch. You can't lie about what your product does. And yet you come into political advertising and it's quite all right to say, like, in the case, so the one I'm thinking of immediately is Trump's claim that like all the Mexicans are coming over here, they're not bringing their best, they're all drug addicts and rapists and things like that. And I mean, clearly that's a lie. It's so self-evident that it is a lie. But I'm really interested that there's almost no regulation in that space. Like political communication, political adverts are just given free rein. And it's often conceptualized like we just have faith that the voters will figure it out. Like the voters are sovereign and the supreme arbiter of truth. But like Simon was saying before, almost what do you do in a situation where you're being constantly bombarded with different truths that can't all be correct? Well, you have to use some kind of heuristic. You're not a journalist. It would be unreasonable to expect you to go off and go, okay, well, I'm going to spend 6 months researching. What is the demographic of people who come from America illegally? How many of them go on to commit crimes? It's impossible for you to find that out, and so you have to delegate it to someone. And like Gavin mentioned, a lot of the time this is becoming a party political delegation, right? Well, I'm a Republican, so I delegate that to the Republicans, and they're a Democrat, and they delegate it to the Democrats. But it's interesting that there's no authoritative body that sits behind this after the fact that is able to go, well, actually, you lied, and we're going to do something to sort of unpick that. We're going to make an official statement that is a lie, and we're going to try and address it. And you can just say whatever the hell you want. And it's surprising to me.
I suppose that's really interesting because that's kind of, left down now to journalists. And I think particularly, the last 4 or 5 years where Trump's been in power and whatnot, it has been down to, journalists, news TV stations to fact check. You see all these fact check accounts on Twitter and the like. So no, thank you, Jonathan. Simon, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about populism and identity politics. And again, of course, all in the backdrop of Trumpism, particularly when it comes to culture wars and the like.
Yeah, so there was a very interesting book written, I think it was 1997 by Richard Rorty, called Achieving Our Country. And it was a guy on the academic left critiquing the academic left. And I don't necessarily agree with everything he said here. I mean, he said that cultural Marxism was the worst thing at Hackens academia, which got my hackles up a little bit. But there was some interesting points about this, and it was very prescient in that, he talked about the fact that, so leading up through the 90s and stuff, you had this whole critique, social political critique, which was really invested in sort of renaming the system, naming the system. What's the system? It's not enough just to be, trying to get specific political campaigns like a minimum wage, but if you're part of the system, you're part of the problem, right? If you've got an Amazon account, you're an evil capitalist, that kind of stuff. And it's quite interesting because that sort of then meant that maybe the sort of the left shrunk, because you couldn't be left if you were a liberal and pro-capitalist, right? And you've got this increasing kind of dissatisfaction coming on, as well, with some of the kind of lower income families and things like that. And then when you've got this whole sort of confusion about, well, who do we blame, right? Because then when things get sort of privatized, you can't just kind of blame the government, because maybe it's sort of private companies, maybe it's big pharma, who knows? And then all this fake news stuff. And in this space, this is something that Rorty says, there's going to be the rise of, once again, and and I'm using the gender of this very specifically, unfortunately, strong men leaders, right? People are going to get to a point, and are at a point, I think, where they're so confused, and with the barrage of information you're getting, and just to put an extremity on this, it's not just lies and things; it's double speak. I mean, I can think of as a UK analogy, right? Either we're so powerful we can go it alone. But the very same people who are saying that are also saying that the EU are holding us over a barrel in negotiations. So either we're super powerful or we're not. Which one is it? This double speak is creating this huge confusion where it's actually, and also as a side point, it's confusion. It's complicated what's right and wrong these days, right? It's very complicated. I find myself second guessing my own situation, my privilege all the time. Simplicity is really attractive in this environment, right? And someone to come along to say it's this with a slogan, "Make America Great Again." It's attractive. So in this environment of confusion, it will only benefit this whole kind of populist, strongman approach to politics. The nuance and subtlety, negotiation and compromise, all the cornerstones, I guess, of democracy, just disappear.
Thank you for that, Simon. We have another question from Dominic, who says that while he agrees that he agrees that talking to the White House is a fool's errand, but getting working people into a space where they can share commonality should be a goal, shouldn't it? Jonathan, I wondered if you could help answer Dominic's question. Trying to get people into a space where they share something in common, it should be a goal, shouldn't it? Of any precedent.
So the question itself is really interesting, right? And I think it's fair to assume that Dominic is based in the UK, because in the UK there is a normative virtue to being working class, and people will assert that they are working class, which is something that does not happen in America. In America, everybody's middle class. They're middle class, but aspiring to be upper class, but they don't entirely understand what that means. And so everybody sees themselves as middle class. And so I think that's really interesting as a distinction there. Is there a virtue to trying to bring in more diverse communities into a space where they can find commonalities? Yes, of course. But the problem is that the system of gatekeeping that exists is almost by design attempting to keep some of these people out. And exactly as we talked about, like social media creating these monocultures where people are kept out who disagree, that is, at least in the Republican Party occupying the White House, happening there also. And one of the only things Trump is decisive about, although not to people themselves, he never fires anyone directly because apparently he doesn't like the confrontation of it. And do you know they say on The Apprentice he actually filmed the "you're fired" bit separately when they weren't there? But nonetheless, whether that's true or not, I don't know. We'll leave that. That's confusion for you, Simon. We'll leave it. We'll leave it as a question for the audience, so you can look into that. But nonetheless, it certainly is happening that those with diverse views increasingly are pushed out, and it need not be very diverse. It's really interesting how ruthless that machine is at creating that monoculture, and the idea that 100% loyalty is the only thing that matters. Trump, for all of his failings at least, has a very strong emphasis on loyalty, which is either a good thing or a bad thing. But there's this very strong focus on loyalty, which inherently pushes out people who think differently, because you won't be loyal to the entire project and to everything that goes with it if you are different, if you have those differences that Dominic is right would be extremely valuable if they were included.
Thank you, Jonathan. As a follow-up question, Dominic's wondering if we think as a panel that social media has made that harder, or, like in itself, or do you think it's been used as a tool, so people think that they don't have to empathize as much? Simon, I wonder, you're smiling. I wonder if you could help answer that, please.
A tool is something that you pick up when you need it. An addiction is something that persuades you to use it constantly. So social media is a drug. It's not a tool. It vibrates in your pocket. It pings up little red notifications. It's constantly trying to persuade you to come back to it. It's not hammer you leave in the shed when you need to do some hammering. So, and this connects to Dominic's previous question, because I want to get quite literal about this, actually, which is kind of ironic because, political philosophy doesn't do that. But, there's so many presumptions in these kind of questions and phrasings, right? Space. So where is that? Like, I mean, actually, literally, where is the actual space that we are going to engage in some kind of public discourse or some kind of, okay, let's get, and let's also remember, right, when we're talking about working class, let's not just presume white working class, but we've got, black working class, they've got to come into an actual physical space to share commonalities, right? Because it's not going to happen on social media because it's a drug, it's not a tool.
I really like that approach, Simon. I'm not 100% sure how much I agree with it. I like it. One of the things I thought when I looked at the question, though, about whether like the modern environment in which we live has made finding any sense of commonality harder. And one of the things I like doing, I'm a nerd, leave me be. But one of the things I like doing is looking in history at like exemplars of exactly the same kinds of issues that we face now, and one of the things I found, this is from 1682. It's in a prosecution document which was called Scandalarum Magnatum. And it starts off with a statement. They're prosecuting a bishop or a vicar, I think, because he is preaching a form of the gospel which it disagrees with the received wisdom about the correct interpretation. And obviously, it's a time where this is a big deal, right? In the 1680s, and they say, was there ever more a need than now to prevent false reports when every coffee house table, instead of a better carpet, is covered and pestered with false news? And I think so. On the one hand, we have there is something new going on. We're correct in saying that, but on the other hand, we have this idea that, much like social media at present, these judges are going in and seeing coffee tables like just with loads of pamphlets on them, making use of the printing press, making use of more paper being available to spread political messages, and they're looking at them going, I disagree with this. Something must be done. And so in that sense, I think Dominic has a good point that there's a sense in which social media, yes, is amplifying this, and in many ways is probably making it worse, because at least when you're going into a coffee shop, someone else can put something next to it, and then you have to deal with both of them being there. But at the same time, it's recreating problems that have existed for hundreds of years. I could have gone back even further, but it's written in a more obtuse style of English. To 1275 is the first legislation against fake news that I found. Wow. I don't read non-English languages, so it's possible that there are much older ones, but in the English law, that's where we get to.
I mean, I think that's really interesting.
Jonathan, and really interesting bit of... Can I go on?
Well, I just wanted to add, as a quick point with this too, is that the thing about talking with people physically too is that you have to get on with them. You have to live next door to your neighbour. Do you know what I mean? So you have to sort of go, oh, okay, let's compromise. Let's agree to disagree. You don't have to do that on social media, and that's why it gets so nasty.
I guess there is that whole kind of, like you're in front of a screen kind of thing. You're not saying it to their face mentality. I think that comes with anything as well, whether it comes to politics or, just general bullying and whatnot. But no, thank you both for your answer. I just want to quickly touch on a comment that Iron Thrones, has left about Trump's loyalty. Bring Gavin in. Gavin, do you think Trump's loyalty is one way or two way?
That's a really interesting viewpoint, I would say, on Trump's loyalty to people. You could argue it is one way, with how he's perceived in the media and the way he conducts himself in the White House. But I think if we think about it academically, if we met him privately, it would completely shock us in the way that I think he kind of relates that loyalty. So I think Trump could possibly have a two-way loyalty kind of system in place where he trusts someone else to do the job that they are willing to do. Because if he only had one-way loyalty, probably the entire US cabinet would have been fired or would have been asked to resign by now, because there'll be stuff that they'll need to do in their specific departments that probably, if it was left to Trump to make the decision, the president, if the president was left to make the decision, then I think you would just see an absolute mess within the US federal government. Even we might see that there is, but I think he has a two-way loyalty as well, especially I think with Mike Pence.
Thank you for your answer, Gavin. Just want to quickly touch on a comment left by Son of Earth saying the main cause of racism is feeling unrelatable. Jonathan, I'm just going to put this quickly to you. What do you think?
On the one hand, I can see why someone would say that. because if you struggle to imagine yourself as that person, it is easier to then create them in your mind as like they're an other. An other is different, and it's scary. And in some cases, skin color is a very obvious physical manifestation of that, right? It's not only that. So culturally in America, it's something that was really important, and so it's kind of ingrained in the culture that's a significant difference. That's actually a little bit culturally bound, because there's certainly been cultures where skin color was not a significant, I guess, problem, or it wasn't a significant political issue. It hadn't been problematized in a political sense. But of course, it's so visible. Because it's on people, as it were, all of the time, and so that can lead to that sense of I can't relate to that person because in some sense they're a bit different to me. But I don't believe that actually that is the main cause of it. I think that there's the causes of racism are complex. I think they're historical. I think there is probably a significant classist element to it. But fundamentally, part of it is sort of a learned hatred, which sustains this fictional notion of a community that never existed, but that exists in people's imaginations. And so, I don't know, maybe if people like really met people of other races and got on and were friends, but even then, I see so much of the time people who are friends with people of other races and yet still are racist. And they must be able to relate to their friends. They go around to their house, they drink together, they have barbecues and things, and yet they're still, on any objective measure, racist. They dislike people because of like them being of a different, having a different skin color or being of a different religion or whatever. And so the abstract idea of being unrelatable, I don't know. I don't know the extent to which I would say that is the main cause. Simon, what do you reckon? I'm going to let you get in.
Yeah, Simon, what do you think?
If anything, I've said too many words while I've spoken too much while saying too little.
Okay, so I hate to be sort of a bit like Socrates in this moment, but like I really think we need to talk a lot more around what we mean by the word racism, because for me the concept has moved on beyond the word, right? So what am I talking about? Well, I grew up in Essex, right? So in the 90s, if you called someone racist, what was understood by that term was that they were kind of explicitly racist, or what I like to call like racism you don't need to explain, right? Just bigoted. And you know, I feel like these days we're a much more, or it's definitely much more in the mainstream, the idea that you can have a subconscious racism, right? Where you judge someone by the way that they look. And then we have a kind of racism C, right? Which is structural racism. And at the moment in argument, it feels like somebody might be calling someone else, right? Person A is calling person B racist. And the reason that person A is saying that is because what they're actually saying is you don't recognize structural racism. You don't recognize the disadvantage of some minorities in life and the structures that disadvantage them. And by saying that, that in itself, not recognizing that, is exacerbating and maintaining those racist structures, right? So that's why we often get a situation where somebody says, well, you're racist. And the response is, what are you talking about? You know, I've got mates from this place or that place, right? So I can't be. And so there's this kind of miscommunication because we're not getting clear on the concepts that we mean. So a lot of people at the time will just say structural racism, but unless you've actually experienced and been on the receiving end of structural racism, the only way you can know about it probably is then by being educated about it, learning it. And if you aren't going, if you know, I'm known, I don't know what about the national curriculum and the debates over at the moment, right? If you're not going beyond secondary school, then you may never come across the word or the concept that structural racism exists. So that's a problem. And I'm not sure if the cause is just about feeling unrelatable, because I tend to think most of the time that race is socially constructed. And I think Jonathan kind of sort of hinted at that to some degree in regards to imagined groups and things like that. And what I mean by being socially constructed is just that, yeah, like we've, you know, it's something that society has created, these divisions. They didn't always exist. And so I'm not sure if feeling that you can't relate to someone is just because you've been told they are that different. You know.
Thank you, Simon and Jonathan, for your really, thought-provoking answer to that. I'm not sure if it's a question, a bit of a statement. But we're going to take some time now to speak to our current student, Gavin, who can thankfully share his journey as an international relations and politics student. Gavin, could you talk to us a little about what your lectures cover in regards to US politics and, what kind of things you've learned so far?
Yeah, of course. I know that me and you kind of do the same lecture in the same module, so we'll bounce off each other. I would say that I've definitely learned a lot. I think we have learned a lot of things more from what we have done in A-level. I don't know about you, Aaron. I don't know if you learned US politics at A-level, because I did. And I just fell in love with it. And so I wanted to kind of explore more about how the US system works and compare it to the UK system and all other systems of governance around the world. But it's not a first year module, unfortunately. However, it is a second and a third year module. So in the second year, you kind of learn about issues such as what we've talked about during this live stream. But then also we talk about what actions can be taken by each of the branches of the federal government and state government and states as an entity. I don't know about you, pretty sure we did a presentation on the successes of the Obama administration in our second year. And we looked at various different issues and policies that that administration came up with, and we kind of agreed that there were some actually failures in that administration. So you kind of develop your mind, but then also look at the facts when it comes around to US politics. And now in third year, doing it is now solely based on the American presidency. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more, because I've talked too much about that.
Yeah, and it might be a bit cliche to say, but what a time to be studying US politics and the presidency in particular. But no, just to touch on what you've already mentioned about the US government module in the second year, I absolutely loved that. And it was pretty much like the sole reason I wanted to continue with my kind of, Americans politics study and study the American presidency in my final year. But I liked it was a really good kind of like crash course, if you like, into US politics, because I didn't study politics at A-level. But it was really great to see, different themes come out. We investigated different themes, such as, like racism and things like that, like we just touched on now. It was also great to see how our constitution compares to the US's, of course, because ours is unwritten and theirs is written. And, we looked at all the different amendments, and not just, the societal impacts of that, but the political impacts of all the amendments and whatnot as well. In terms of the American presidency module, I think that's great. You get to, adopt a president, so you can pick one president and study them really in depth. And, by the end of it, you could almost be, like a biographer about that president. So I think that's really great, because you do get into the nitty gritty. You'll find out why they made those policy decisions. I think the US government module in the second year is a great crash course. And then, the American presidency module in the third year really does help to get into the nitty gritty, especially when it comes to the presidency.
Yeah, of course.
Do you see your future career in politics? And if not, where do you see yourself, in a couple of years, Gavin?
Yeah, of course. Before I answer that question, I'm going to just bring in Jonathan and Simon into this. Pretending that, going back to their student days, of course, which I'm sure wasn't that many years ago, if they were going to do the American presidency module like what we're doing, I wonder what president they would pick. And we are only allowed to pick presidents from FDR and onwards. So I'll pass that quickly to the floor.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
So in my case, I would study LBJ because I think he is a really interesting person, but also one of my friends who is, and you'll understand in this context, older than I am, actually has a criminal conviction from his home country for insulting a foreign head of state, and that head of state was LBJ. They had this chant going, which apparently in Dutch sounds really nice, like LBJ murderer. And apparently that it really works in Dutch. I don't speak any Dutch, so I'll have to take his word for it. And they got taken to court. And the thing is, you get to make a statement in your own defense. And so they came with like giant pre-prepared statements to read out to not only reiterate the very thing that they had asserted before, but to assert it also then with evidence alongside, because it's not just chanting anymore. It's people sat in court being forced to write down what you say. And also, I find it amusing, like when you travel into America and they ask you, have you ever been convicted of a crime for which the punishment could be more than 5 years in prison? And you have to say, like, yes, it was insulting your head of state. And so I think that LBJ is a very interesting, very problematic person who you already mentioned some of the positive things he did, but did an incredible amount of harm alongside it. And I just find it fascinating that we live in a world where the same person can do both objectively good things and incredible evil at the same time. And I don't know, people are complex, and I think it's worth like taking time to explore that. And also, I'd like it if I could get my mate in to my study, like I could interview him or something.
And Simon?
I think Gavin's clearly got a future in politics because he's already diverted from the question. Do you know, part of me wants to say Barack Obama because I'm interested in, you know, the things that happened around Obamacare and the battles around it. And there was a moment where it felt like so many things that had been stuck for so long, like healthcare, gun laws, something might happen. But I think, if I was being honest, I'd probably say now and Trump purely because, not because I'm interested in him, but because I'm really interested in the sociological aspect to what's going on and populism, and you know, and taking a sort of look at this through the lens of, you know, someone like Max Weber or something different, how authority seems to shift between this kind of bureaucratic legal authority, right, that we trust and expertise, to this kind of personal charismatic authority. And I don't mean that Trump's charismatic in that sense, but that sort of, yeah, the things I've talked about, you know, strong man leader, you know, how, I mean, everything's about to collapse, right? So surely just before the fall of the Roman Empire is the most interesting time to look at the Roman Empire, I guess. Like you said, it's a crazy time. And the academic in me wants to, even though I acknowledge it's probably impossible, wants to try and get as close to some kind of explanation or pattern to what the hell was going on.
Yeah. So quickly going back to going to finish off my answer. I never. I know I'm going to be such a politician. Is that I have thought about going into politics to answer Simon's question as well, but I think I'm going to go in more of the administrative side of politics and government. So I've currently applied for the civil service, but also I'd also want to work for a member of parliament because I'm just so interested in the role of what an MP does, that kind of helping them along, and also learning more about what MPs do in a role where I'm dealing with members of the public and on behalf of that MP. I think that would be the most interesting thing. I don't know about you, Aaron, because do you want to go into politics as well?
Interesting. Politics, in a sense, yes, like you, I'd like to be a bit more in the background, if that makes sense, and go into something to do with like a digital agency that consults, parties and candidates and whatnot. But yeah, not a direct future in politics. I couldn't imagine anything worse than being like an actual MP or anything, particularly. Particularly at the minute, so I'm glad we share that. I'm glad we share that view. But unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap up this live stream here. So I just want to say thank you very much to everybody that tuned in and listened, and thank you for all your questions too. Before we end the stream, though, I'd just like to say there are more Ask the Expert sessions happening tomorrow. So if you are interested and want to find out more, just be sure to head to our website to explore the live streams. Enjoy the video and have a great rest of your day. And we hope to see you at DMU in the future. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.